Stem cells are cells that are undifferentiated, meaning they do not have a specific job or function. While skin cells protect your body, muscle cells contract, and nerve cells send signals, stem cells do not have any specific structures or functions. Stem cells do have the potential to become all other kinds of cells in your body. Your body uses stem cells to replace worn-out cells when they die. Scientists hope that stem cells could be used to create a very special kind of personalized medicine in which we could replace your own body parts with, well, your own body parts. Stem cell researchers are working hard to find ways in which to use stem cells to create new tissue to replace the parts of organs that are damaged by injury or disease. Using stem cells to replace damaged bodily tissue is called regenerative medicine.
Can you elaborate on radiation and its effects?
Radiation is a very important thing that we all need to know. You see, it's actually a form of energy. It may be in the form of waves or particles. It functions in our environment in many ways. It is transmitted, reflected, emitted, or absorbed.
Why is it viewed to be so dangerous by one and all?
You see, it's in the form of very powerful and dangerous rays that are extended from different radioactive substances. It is the energy that is emitted in the form of rays, i.e., ultraviolet radiation or electromagnetic radiation. The sources of these radiations may vary, from rocks, soil, and space to the human body itself. Medical use of radioactive substances, impurities from the nuclear bomb test, and wastes from the nuclear reactors are the other sources of this radiation pollution. Cells in our body may get damaged due to exposure to high levels of radiation. Sometimes the results are fatal. Childhood cancer is one such effect. This happens when the DNA in the germ cell of the ovaries of the mother is affected, which passes the disease to the offspring.
This week I'm going to talk about the difference between translators and interpreters. It's a common misconception that translators and interpreters do the same thing, so I'd just like to highlight a few similarities and differences between the two. Firstly, translation refers to written communication, whereas interpreting refers to verbal communication. So, for example, a translator will not attend a court hearing to verbally translate between the parties involved, but would maybe translate the written evidence used in the case. Secondly, both jobs require different skills. A translator requires the ability to write well and comprehensively into a target language. This means that they need to have an excellent command of their native language. For example, although I can speak French to a good standard, I cannot translate from English to French, although I could translate from French into English, which means I'm only halfway there to being an international player. An interpreter needs to be able to speak both languages proficiently. Thirdly, the qualifications and experience required to become either a professional translator or interpreter do differ. Both roles require years of training with a resulting qualification, but what they can learn on the training will be completely different. So, just to be clear, translators will translate written text and interpreters will translate verbal communication.
Both music and language have a lot of similarities. They involve complex sequences that unfold in time. They are both forms of communication. This has interested all the world's best philosophers, even going back to Plato 2,000 years ago. Scientists like Darwin wrote about possible evolutionary links between music and language in his book, The Descent of Man, and so did artists like Leonard Bernstein, who gave a series of lectures at Harvard in the 70s. He spoke about the grammar of language and the grammar of music from Noam Chomsky's theories. So, it's a persistent question. It keeps drawing interest from scientists today, but there are some basic obvious similarities. For example, both music and language have rhythmic, systematic patterns of timing, accent, and grouping. Both language and music have melody-structured patterns of pitch over time. Both have syntax, discrete elements like words or notes, and principles for combining those elements into sequences. Sentences are just random sequences of words. Both convey effect, which means emotion using sound. You can make out a lot of emotion from a person's voice, and music has the characteristic of providing emotions like happiness or sadness.
One of the most interesting things about magnetism is that the Earth itself has its own magnetic field. Now, we believe the field is created by the flowing of liquid metals, particularly iron, at the Earth's outer core. This liquid metal is spinning within the Earth and acts as a dynamo, generating both electric currents and a magnetic field around our planet. We know that it is important for all life on the Earth because the field protects plants and animals from being bombarded by solar radiation. And solar radiation is not just the light and heat we receive from the sun either. Solar radiation, or solar wind, is the stream of highly charged and energetic particles from the sun. When these particles come close to the Earth, they become trapped by the Earth's magnetic field. By trapping these particles, the Earth's magnetic field prevents these particles from coming to the surface where they can harm plants and animals. The Earth's magnetic field encircles the Earth, protecting us from solar radiation, and we call this region the magnetosphere. This region is prone to intense energy. What happens is that sometimes the sun ejects large bubbles of particles with their own magnetic fields. As these bubbles interact with the magnetosphere, a large amount of energy is released, called a geomagnetic storm. These storms cause rapid changes in the magnetosphere, which may affect the magnetic and electrical systems on the surface, such as power grids, communication systems, and others.
Today, 150,000 farmers in India have committed suicide in areas where seed has been destroyed, where they have to buy the seed from Monsanto and buy it every year at very, very high cost. And that high cost seed is getting them into debt, and that debt is pushing them to suicide. What we've done is create community seed banks, places where we collect and save seeds, rescue them from disappearance, multiply them, and then distribute them according to farmers' needs. And About 40 community seed banks have been created across the length and breadth of India. Places where these have been created, farmers are not in distress because the biggest cost today is seeds and chemicals. These seed banks have now been a new place where we can respond to the new crisis of globalization on the one hand and climate change on the other. Globalization has led to farmers' suicides. We are able to take seeds to these suicide zones and distribute the seeds so that farmers can break out of that dependency, grow food crops, get out of debt. We've been able to create community seed banks to deal with climate change, with the extreme flooding, the new droughts, the cyclones, the hurricanes that lead to salinization.
Mars is fourth planet from the Sun and the second smallest planet in the solar system after Mercury, named after the Roman god of war. It is often referred to as a red planet because the iron oxide prevalent on its surface gives it a reddish appearance. Mars is a terrestrial planet with a thin atmosphere, having surface features reminiscent both of the inner crater of the Moon and the volcanoes, valleys, deserts, and polar ice caps of the Earth. The rotational period and the seasonal cycles of the Mars are likewise similar to those of Earth, as it was the tilt that produces the seasons. Mars is the site of the Olympus Mons, the largest volcano and the second largest known mountain in the solar system, and the Valles Marineris, one of the largest canyons in the solar system. Until the first successful Mars flyby in 1965 by Mariner 4, many speculated about the presence of liquid water on the planet's surface. This was based on observed periodic variation in the light and dark patches, particularly in the polar latitude, which appeared to be seas and continents. Geological evidence gathered by the unmanned mission suggested that Mars once have large scale of water coverage on the surface on some earlier stages of existence.
In criminal trials, memories are basic, a critical feature of proceedings. Both sides of the legal team, prosecution and defense, are likely to rely to some extent on witnesses and on what they can recall of events that led up to or indeed formed part of the criminal act. Now, it's been well established in various circles that memory can be unreliable, particularly if new information is introduced in cross-examination that hasn't been presented up until that point. New facts that witnesses were unaware of. A lot of research has been done to test the effects of this, and it can be very problematic. For example, if you show a group of subjects a video of a crime, then you get someone else to read them an account of the same crime, but adding in information, be it ideas or objects that weren't present on the video. What researchers have found is that when the subjects are asked to retell what they saw on the video, they too include a number of things that were never there. In other words, the introduction of new information in a court of law is very likely to skew or distort a witness's memory of the event.
So there are two theories for how the gas giants formed. One is the same theory I showed you just now, core accretion, right? And the other is called disk instability. And one of our colleagues at DTM has done a lot of work on that. And so it's unclear exactly how they formed, but you're right, what we're trying to do, the reason we're trying to get to higher and higher pressure in the lab is because we're trying to understand more about the pressure inside the gas giants. It's thought that the gas giants also have a metallic core, but maybe a metallic core not made of iron. Hydrogen, for example, becomes metallic at a certain pressure. Okay, so it's very possible that the insides of these planets could have metallic cores, could have hydrogen cores, could have rocky portions. We're not sure, but the higher pressure we can get in the lab, the higher the pressure we can get in the lab, the closer we can get to understanding the interiors of the gas giants and the exoplanets that are so big.
So happiness economics can help us get to these questions, and I'll try to give you some examples of this. Now, even though there's a lot of skepticism originally about using this survey, surveys, what people say, make them happy. The number of reasons that we are getting increasingly confident in doing so. One is that they're consistent pattern, remarkable consistent pattern that determines well-being across large samples of people, across countries, across the world, and over time. Some of the basic things that make people happy, and I will show you some of these: income, health, marital status, employment status. Some of these are very basic things that are remarkably consistent across countries, across the world. So that gives us some sense that these surveys are picking up consistent patterns. And when we know what consistent patterns are, we can look how other things that very much more affect people's well-being, the environment and equality, the nature's institution, raging on living, and all kinds of other things that very much more.
Today's lecture will center on prehistoric people of the Nevada desert. Now, most of these prehistoric desert people moved across the countryside throughout the year. You might think that they were wandering aimlessly. Well, far from it. They actually followed a series of carefully planned moves. Where they moved depended on where food was available, places where plants were ripening or fish were spawning. Now, often when these people moved, they carried all their possessions on their backs. But if the journey was long, extra food and tools were sometimes stored in caves or beneath rocks. One of these caves is now an exciting archaeological site. Beyond its small opening is a huge underground grotto. Even though the cave's very large, it was certainly too dark and dusty for the travelers to live in. But it was a great place to hide things, and tremendous amounts of food supplies and artifacts have been found there. The food includes dried fish, seeds, and nuts. The artifacts include stone spear points and knives. The spear points are actually rather small. Here's a picture of some that were found. You can see their size in relation to the hands holding them.
So, faults are breaks in the Earth's crust. We can identify them because of the discontinuity in the structure within the Earth's crust across faults. And earthquakes occur on these faults, so varied processes by which these faults move to a large extent is due to the earthquakes. So we have a fault plane, and the earthquake is so focused on this fault plane, and the earthquake starts at the particular point on the fault plane, and we call that focus of the earthquake. The rupture propagates out from that point on the rupture plane to cover the entire fault plane. The rupture is that particular earthquake. We talked about the epicenter of the earthquake a lot. The epicenter is just the surface projection of the focus of the earthquake. So if you wanted to look at a map view where the earthquake was located, we would be able to look that into the earth. We would see the focus down some depth in the earth, or the epicenter, just a point vertically above that focus at the surface of the earth. So, this is the relationship between the faults and the earthquakes.
The amount of money drug companies spend on TV ads has doubled in recent years, and it's no wonder. Studies show the commercials work. Consumers go to their doctors with a suggestion for a prescription drug they saw advertised on TV.
You are most likely to see drug ads during prime time, especially around the news. Researchers analyzed 38 ads aimed at people with conditions like hypertension, herpes, high cholesterol, depression, arthritis, and allergies. The drug industry says these ads arm consumers with information, but researchers found that though the information was technically accurate, the tone was misleading. UCLA psychologist Dominic Frosch headed the study.
What we would see in these ads is that before taking the prescription drug, the character's life was out of control. And the loss of control really extended beyond just the impact of the health condition.
For example, herpes patients were portrayed as being incapacitated for days, insomniacs utterly out of sync on the job, and depressed patients friendless and boring at parties.
When the character is then shown taking the drug, he then magically regains complete control of his life.
None of the ads, of course, mentioned lifestyle changes that could also help treat the condition. After all, it's mass marketing. But in this case, Frosch says, prescription medications are not like soap.